My son-in-law forgot his phone at my house. It rang, and on the screen appeared a photo of my wife, who had passed away 10 years ago. When I opened the message preview, my heart almost stopped. It said she was waiting for him, and she needed cash. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Thomas Bennett, 72 years old. I spent 40 years of my life as a structural engineer in Chicago, calculating load-bearing walls and wind resistance for skyscrapers. I know how to spot a crack in the foundation before the building collapses. And looking across the dinner table that Sunday evening, I saw a massive crack sitting right in front of me wearing a designer suit he could not afford. His name was Jason. The air in my dining room was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The pot roast my housekeeper Marta had prepared was getting cold, and my daughter Emily was staring at her plate, pushing peas around with a fork. She looked tired. At 34, she should have been glowing, but ever since she married Jason, she looked like a shadow of the vibrant girl I raised. Jason cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. He had that salesman smile plastered on his face, the one that didn't reach his eyes. He tapped his fingers on the mahogany table. "So," Thomas Jason said, leaning forward, "what do you think the crypto mining initiative is foolproof? We are talking about a 300% return in the first quarter. I just need the seed capital, $500,000. It is a drop in the bucket for a man of your stature." I picked up my wineglass and took a slow sip. I looked him dead in the eye. "I did not build my wealth by throwing money into invisible coins, Jason. I built it on steel concrete and contracts. Real things. Things you can touch." Jason's smile twitched. "Come on, Thomas. Don't be a dinosaur. This is the future. Emily and I, we want to build something. We want to be independent." I glanced at my daughter. She finally looked up, her eyes pleading. "Dad, please. Jason has worked so hard on this pitch. He just needs a chance." It broke my heart. Emily was smart, but she was fragile. When her mother, my Catherine, died in that car accident 10 years ago, Emily fell apart. She needed someone to lean on. Unfortunately, she leaned on Jason, a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a payday. I set my glass down. The sound echoed in the silent room. "No." Jason blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "Excuse me," I said. "No, Jason. I am not giving you $500,000. If you want to invest, use your own money. Or better yet, get a job that pays a steady salary instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the rage flash behind Jason's eyes. It was quick, like a snake striking, but I saw it. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You just don't get it, do you?" He spat out, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "You are so stuck in the past, you can't see an opportunity when it is staring you in the face. You think you are protecting Emily, but you are just holding us back." "Jason," Emily cried out, reaching for his hand, but he pulled away. "I need a smoke," he muttered. He turned and stormed out toward the patio door, sliding it open with enough force that I thought the glass might shatter. He stepped out into the cool Chicago night, leaving the door slightly ajar. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Emily began to sob quietly. "Dad, why do you have to be so hard on him?" "He is trying. He is using you, Emily," I wanted to say. But I didn't. I just shook my head. That was when I heard the vibration. Jason had left his phone on the table right next to the untouched pot roast. It buzzed against the hard wood, demanding attention. I usually would have ignored it. I respect privacy. But then the screen lit up. I froze. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. I was not looking at a generic wallpaper. I was looking at Catherine, my wife. But it was not just any photo. It was a picture of her standing by the railing of a boat, wearing a blue sundress, her hair blowing in the wind, laughing at something I had said. I knew exactly when that photo was taken. It was our 30th wedding anniversary. Lake Geneva. I remembered taking the camera out. I remembered telling her she looked more beautiful than the day I married her. That photo was on my digital camera. It was stored on a hard drive in my fireproof safe in the basement. I had never posted it on Facebook. I had never sent it to Emily. It was my private memory. So why was it glowing on my son-in-law's phone screen? I reached out my hand, trembling slightly, and tilted the phone toward me. It was a notification from a messaging app. The sender's name was simply K. And then I read the message preview. M dang doi un ochoku, mang teo tin mat. Konbe Emily bat do ngingo roy. Wait, let me translate what my brain processed in that second. The text was in English, but my mind was spinning. The text actually read, "Waiting for you at the usual spot." Bring cash. Emily is getting suspicious. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My dead wife was texting my son-in-law. She was asking for money, and she was talking about our daughter as if she were a threat. I am a logical man. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in data. And the data in front of me screamed that something sick was happening. My shock turned into something else, something cold and hard. It was the same feeling I used to get when I walked onto a construction site and saw a contractor cutting corners on safety. It was the feeling of imminent danger. I did not scream. I did not call Emily over to look. If I showed her now, she would panic. She would ask Jason and he would spin some lie. I needed evidence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own phone. I unlocked it, opened the camera app, and hovered it over Jason's screen. The focus square turned yellow. Click. I took one photo, then another just to be safe. I captured the photo of Catherine, the timestamp, and that damnable message. As soon as I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the patio door slid open. Jason walked back in. The smell of mints couldn't quite mask the faint scent of cigarettes. He looked composed again, his mask back in place. He walked toward the table, his eyes darting immediately to his phone. He saw me staring at him. He saw the way I was sitting rigid, my hands clenched on the table. He sensed something was wrong. He snatched his phone up quickly, shoving it into his pocket. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice smooth but tight. "Just needed some fresh air." "Stress, you know," Emily was wiping her eyes with a napkin. I stayed silent. I watched him. I watched the way he wouldn't meet my gaze. I watched the way his hand lingered over the pocket where the phone was. I stood up slowly. My joints popped. I felt every day of my 72 years, but I also felt a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt in a decade. "You should go," I said. My voice was low, devoid of any warmth. Jason blinked, surprised by the sudden dismissal. "What?" "We haven't even finished dinner." I said, "Go. Take Emily and go home." "Dad?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. I looked at Jason. I didn't blink. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to see that I knew. "Tell me, Jason," I said, leaning in close enough to smell the cheap cologne he wore to cover the stench of his lies. "Did my wife just call you?" Jason's face went pale. Not just white, but a sickly grayish color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure terror. Then he laughed. A nervous, high-pitched sound. "What, Thomas, that is not funny. Catherine has been gone for 10 years. You are tired. You are imagining things." He grabbed Emily's arm a little too roughly. "Come on, Em. Your dad is clearly not himself tonight. We are leaving." I watched them walk to the door. I didn't stop them. I didn't yell. I stood there in the middle of my empty dining room, listening to the sound of his car engine fading into the distance. I pulled my phone out again and looked at the photo I had taken. The woman in the blue dress smiled back at me. "I am not imagining things, Jason," I whispered to the empty room. I walked over to the security panel on the wall and locked the house down. Then I walked to the basement. I didn't go to sleep. I went to my old workstation, the one with the 3 monitors I used for drafting blueprints. I sat down and placed my phone on the desk. My hands were steady now. The engineer was back at work, but this time I wasn't building a skyscraper. I was preparing to demolish one. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, Mike, it is Thomas Bennett," I said. There was a pause, then a warmer tone. "Mr. Bennett, it has been a long time. Everything okay? No, Mike. I need you to work tonight. I need eyes on a vehicle, and I need you to find out who is using a dead woman's face to make phone calls." I hung up and looked at the screen again. "Waiting for you at the usual spot." I was going to find that spot. And God help whoever was waiting there. That question hung in the air, like smoke from a blown-out candle. "My wife called you." The silence in the dining room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow, ragged breathing of my daughter. Jason held his phone against his chest, his knuckles white, his eyes darting between me and Emily. For a moment, he looked like a cornered rat, the kind that bites when it has nowhere left to run. But then, right before my eyes, I watched a transformation that made my blood run cold. The fear vanished from his face, replaced by a look of wounded dignity. He straightened his jacket, let out a long, exasperated sigh, and shook his head as if he were dealing with a senile child. He walked over to Emily and knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hand in his. "Honey, I am so sorry," Jason said, his voice dripping with a sickly sweetness that made my stomach turn. "I did not want you to find out this way. It was supposed to be a surprise for your birthday next week." Emily looked up and her eyes red and swollen. "What are you talking about?" "Jason. Why was Mom's picture on your phone?" Jason looked up at me with a mix of pity and defiance before turning his attention back to my daughter. He pulled his phone out slowly, unlocking it with a deliberate calmness. "It is called Project Mnemosine," he said softly. "It is a new AI service barely out of beta testing. Grief tech. I have been working with a developer friend of mine for months on this." I stood there, my arms crossed, listening to the live form in real time. Grief tech. It sounded exactly like the kind of buzzword nonsense he always pitched. "Go on," I said, my voice flat. "Explain to me how an app sends a text message from a dead woman asking for cash." Jason didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes locked on Emily, ignoring me completely. I know how much you have been struggling lately. I know how much you miss her voice. This app, it takes old photos and videos, analyzes them, and creates a digital persona. I scanned that photo from one of your dad's old albums in the study a few months ago when we were visiting. I wanted to give you the chance to talk to her again, to hear her tell you she loves you one more time. I watched Emily's face crumble. The skepticism washed away, replaced by a desperate, heartbreaking hope. You did that for me," she whispered. "I did," Jason said, squeezing her hand. "I wanted to give you the one thing money cannot buy." I felt a surge of rage so hot, it almost blinded me. He was using my dead wife, using Emily's trauma to cover his tracks. I slammed my hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "Stop it," I growled. "Do not lie to her." "And the text message, Jason, the part about the usual spot, the part about bringing cash, is your AI ghost running an extortion racket." Now Jason finally stood up and faced me. He looked calm, almost bored. "That is just a glitch, Thomas. It is a beta app. The developers are based overseas. The translation software is garbage. The notification was supposed to say that the subscription renewal is due. Cash is just a bad translation for payment. And usual spot refers to the server access point. I was getting ready to pay the premium fee so it would be ready for Emily's birthday." He turned back to Emily, his face the picture of sincerity. I got the notification during dinner and panicked. I didn't want the surprise to be ruined. That is why I went outside. I was trying to fix the billing issue so it would be perfect for you. It was a masterclass in manipulation. It was a lie so audacious, so detailed, and so perfectly targeted at Emily's weak points that it was almost bulletproof. He had taken a moment of horror and twisted it into an act of romantic devotion. And it worked. Emily burst into fresh tears, but these were not tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude. She threw her arms around Jason's neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Oh, Jason," she sobbed. "I am so sorry. I love you so much. Thank you." I stood there isolated on the other side of the table. I was the villain now. I could see it in the way Emily looked at me over Jason's shoulder. Her eyes were hard, accusing. "Dad, how could you?" She said, her voice shaking with anger. "He tries to do something beautiful for me, something to help me heal. And you treat him like a criminal. You are so paranoid. You are so bitter." Emily listened to me. I started taking a step forward. "No," she shouted, pulling away from Jason to point a finger at me. "You have always hated him. You think no one is good enough for this family. You think because you have money you can control everyone. Well, you can't control this. You just ruined the only good thing that has happened to me in months." Her words hit me like physical blows. I looked at Jason. He was stroking her hair, comforting her, but over the top of her head, his eyes met mine. There was a smirk there. A tiny, imperceptible curl of the lip that said, "I won." I knew in that moment that if I pushed harder, I would lose her. If I demanded he show me the app, if I accused him of lying again, Emily would cut me off completely. And if she cut me off, I couldn't protect her. I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat. I had to retreat to fight another day. I took a deep breath, forcing my shoulders to relax. I lowered my eyes to the floor. "I am sorry I lied." The words tasted like ash. I didn't know. I overreacted. You know how protective I am of your mother's memory." Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes. "It is not just about Mom, Dad. It is about you respecting my husband." "I understand," I said quietly. "I am tired. Maybe it is best if we call it a night." Jason nodded, the benevolent victor. "Come on, Em. Let's get you home. You need to rest." I watched them gather their coats. I watched Jason guide her toward the door, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He didn't look at me again. He didn't have to. He had played his hand perfectly. When the front door closed, the house fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. I locked the deadbolt. I turned off the porch light. I stood in the darkness of the hallway for a long time, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock. My heart was still pounding, but my mind was clear. Coldly, brutally clear. I walked back to the dining room table. The smell of Jason's cologne still lingered in the air. I picked up my phone and looked at the photo I had taken of his screen. Grief tech. Subscription errors. Bad translations. It was a brilliant story. Plausible enough to fool a grieving woman who wanted desperately to believe in magic. But it had one fatal flaw. A flaw that a structural engineer notices, but a con artist misses. Apps live on smartphones. Apps use data. Apps send notifications through the operating system. But when I had looked at the phone in the garden before he snatched it away, I had seen the icon. It wasn't a push notification from a fancy new AI application. It was a standard SMS text message. And more importantly, AI bots live on servers. They don't have physical bodies. They don't need to meet at a usual spot. And they certainly don't need physical cash. Jason had made a mistake. He thought he was smarter than the old man. He thought I was just a dinosaur with a checkbook. He didn't know that I spent 40 years analyzing stress points. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady. He had won the battle at the dinner table, but he had just started a war he wasn't equipped to fight. I drank the water in one gulp. Then I walked to the basement door. AI does not call from a burner number, I whispered to myself. I descended the stairs into the cool, dark air of my workspace. It was time to find out who was really on the other end of that phone. Because if it wasn't a computer program, it was a woman. And if she was pretending to be my wife, I was going to find her. And when I did, Jason's perfect little story was going to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. The blue light from the 3 high-definition monitors washed over my face, turning the lines of my skin into a topographic map of exhaustion. My basement office was silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans in the hard drive tower. This was my sanctuary. For 40 years, I had sat in this chair designing the skeletal structures of hospitals and skyscrapers, calculating the exact amount of pressure a steel beam could take before it buckled. Tonight, I was calculating the breaking point of my own family. I did not go to sleep. Sleep is for the innocent, and after what I had witnessed at dinner, I no longer had the luxury of innocence. I typed in my password, a string of numbers that corresponded to the date I first met Catherine. The security system interface loaded, displaying a grid of 16 cameras covering every inch of my property. I selected camera 4, the patio. I scrubbed the timeline back to 7:14 p.m. That was when Jason had stormed out of the dining room, feigning righteous indignation. I pressed play. On the screen, grainy but clear enough, Jason stepped out into the cool night air. He didn't look like a man who was hurt by his father-in-law's rejection. He didn't look like a husband trying to fix a billing error for a sentimental gift. He looked like a predator checking the wind. He walked to the edge of the patio, out of the direct line of sight from the dining room window, but he forgot that I had installed a wide-angle lens specifically to monitor the back gate. He checked his watch. He paced back and forth, running a hand through his hair. Then he did something that made the engineer in me nod in grim satisfaction. He didn't reach into his jacket pocket where he had put the iPhone he showed us at the dinner table. He didn't reach into his pants pocket. Instead, he knelt down on one knee as if he were tying his shoelace. I zoomed in. The pixels blurred slightly, but the image was undeniable. He reached into his left sock and pulled out a small black object. It wasn't a smartphone with a high-resolution screen capable of running advanced AI software. It was a burner phone. A cheap plastic flip phone that you buy at a gas station for $20 when you don't want to be traced. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. AI. Grief tech apps do not run on 10-year-old flip phones. They do not require you to hide the device in your ankle sock like a drug dealer carrying a stash. I watched as he flipped it open and made a call. He didn't speak for long. Maybe 10 seconds. His body language was aggressive. He slashed his hand through the air, chopping at the invisible space between him and whoever was on the other end. He was shouting, though the glass doors muffled the sound. Then he snapped the phone shut, shoved it back into his sock, and stood up. He spent a few seconds composing himself, adjusting his tie, and putting that mask of the grieving, misunderstood husband back on his face before sliding the patio door open to return to our dinner. The video loop ended. I paused it on the frame where he was holding the burner phone. I reached for my landline. Cell signals can be intercepted, but a copper wire line is harder to tap without physical access. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Yeah, Mike, it is Thomas." The rustling of sheets on the other end. "Thomas, it is midnight. Is the house okay?" "The house is standing, Mike, but the foundation is rotting. I have a job for you." Mike O'Malley was a good man. A former Chicago beat cop who had been pushed out of the force for asking too many questions about where the captain's extra income came from. I had helped him set up his private investigation firm when no one else would give him a loan. He owed me, but more than that, he respected me. I need a tail, I said, keeping my voice low. Level 1 surveillance. I need you to get a bug on a vehicle tonight. Who is the target? Mike asked, the sleep completely gone from his voice. Jason, I said. My son-in-law. There was a heavy pause on the other line. Mike knew Emily. He had been security at her wedding. He knew how much I wanted that marriage to work for her sake. You sure about this, Thomas? He asked softly. Once we open this door, we can't close it. I looked at the frozen image on my monitor. The burner phone in Jason's hand looked like a weapon. He is communicating with someone using a burner mic. He is asking for cash, and he is using Catherine's memory to manipulate Emily. I am not just sure. I am late. I gave him the description of Jason's car, a leased Mercedes that I was secretly paying the insurance on. I gave him the license plate. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, and what he eats for lunch. I want audio inside the cabin. Can you get into the car tonight? If it is parked in his driveway, I can pop the lock in 30 seconds, Mike assured me. I will plant a transmitter under the steering column. You will be able to hear him breathe. Do it, I said. And Mike, be careful. I don't think he is working alone. I hung up the phone and stared at the dark screen of the powered-down monitor next to the active one. The reflection of my own face stared back at me. Old, tired, but eyes burning with a cold fire. My mind drifted back. It does that more often these days. It drifted back 10 years to a steakhouse in downtown Chicago. It was the first time Emily had brought Jason to meet us. He was charming then, too. He had ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu without asking, assuming I was paying. He told stories about his time on Wall Street, about deals that were just about to close, about how he was going to revolutionize the fintech industry. Emily was beaming, clutching his arm like he was a prize she had won at a fair. But Catherine, my Catherine. She sat next to me, sipping her water, her beautiful face unreadable to anyone but me. Under the table, her hand found my knee. She squeezed it. Hard. 2 short squeezes. That was our signal. It meant danger. On the drive home that night, while Emily was texting Jason from the back seat, Catherine had turned to me. Her voice was a whisper so Emily wouldn't hear. Thomas, she had said, looking out the window at the passing city lights. He does not look at people when they talk. He looks at their hands. He looks at their watches. He assesses value, not character. You think he is a gold digger? I had asked. I think he is a coyote, she had replied. He is hungry, and he sees a wounded rabbit in our daughter. I had dismissed her fears then. I told her she was being too protective. I told her the boy was just ambitious. I wanted Emily to be happy so badly that I ignored the wisdom of the woman who knew people better than I knew concrete. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the moisture of regret. You were right, Catherine, I whispered to the empty basement. You warned me, and I let the coyote into the henhouse. The hours ticked by. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I didn't move. I sat there reviewing bank statements on the second monitor, tracing withdrawals that Jason had made from the joint account he shared with Emily. Small amounts at first, $200, $500, then larger, $1,000 here, $2,000 there, labeled as business expenses, networking dinners, consulting fees. It was a slow bleed. He wasn't just stealing her money. He was draining her future, drop by drop. At 2:45 a.m., the landline rang again. It sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I picked it up before the second ring. Talk to me, I said. It is Mike. The voice on the other end was grim. The background noise sounded like wind rushing past a car window. Did you plant the bug? I asked. I didn't have to, Mike said. I drove to their house in Lincoln Park to do the job, but the car wasn't there. My grip on the receiver tightened. What do you mean it wasn't there? I watched them leave my house at 8 o'clock. They should have been home by 8:30. He didn't go home, Thomas, Mike said. I tracked the GPS on the Mercedes system. It is a feature you paid for when you bought the lease, remember? Where is he? He is in the south side, Mike said, near 63rd and Halsted. I froze. That wasn't a neighborhood where investment bankers went for late-night meetings. That was a neighborhood of boarded-up windows, gang tags, and desperation. It was a place where a Mercedes parked on the street was an invitation to a carjacking. Is he moving? No. He has been parked in front of a tenement building for 3 hours. The building is a dump, Thomas. Half the lights are out. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. Why would my son-in-law, who claimed to be building a high-tech AI empire, be sitting in a crumbling apartment block in one of the most dangerous parts of Chicago at 3 in the morning? Send me the address, as I said, standing up. You are not going down there, Thomas Mike warned. It is dangerous. Let me handle it. I grabbed my keys from the desk. I am not going to knock on the door, Mike. But I need to see who he is visiting. I need to see the face of the ghost he is consulting. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel tired anymore. The structural integrity of my family had just failed. The collapse had begun, and I was the only one who could control the demolition. I walked out of the basement, past the silent kitchen, and into the garage. My old Ford pickup truck sat there solid and reliable. I climbed in the engine, roaring to life like a waking beast. Jason thought he was playing a game with a senile old man. He was about to find out that this old man built the city he was trying to hide in. I backed out into the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness, heading south toward the truth. The drive south on the Dan Ryan Expressway felt like a descent into another world. The well-manicured lawns and gated driveways of the northern suburbs faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the industrial skeletons of factories that had closed down 20 years ago. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my eyes scanning the road. I had built structures all over this city, but I rarely came down here at night. This was a part of Chicago where the streetlights were often broken, and stop signs were treated as suggestions. I checked the GPS coordinates Mike had sent me. The dot on the screen was blinking steadily, a digital heartbeat leading me to the truth. I pulled off the highway and navigated through a maze of narrow streets. The houses here were old, huddled together for warmth, many with plywood, covering the windows like bandages over wounds. It was 3 in the morning, and the streets should have been empty, but shadows still moved on the corners. I spotted Mike's nondescript gray sedan parked half a block down from a crumbling brick tenement building. I pulled my truck in behind him, killing the lights and the engine. The silence that rushed into the cab was heavy. I grabbed the thermos of black coffee I had brought, my hands shaking slightly, not from cold, but from a rage I was struggling to contain. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. Do not get out of the car. Watch the front door. I lowered my window just a crack to let in the cold night air. The smell of damp concrete and old exhaust fumes filled the cabin. I fixed my eyes on the entrance of the building. It was a heavy steel door, dented and scarred, lit by a single flickering yellow bulb. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I began to wonder if Jason had already left, if we had missed him. I started to question my own sanity. Maybe I was just a paranoid old man chasing shadows. Maybe Jason really was just buying drugs or gambling. Maybe the photo on the phone really was just a sick joke or a misunderstanding. But then the steel door groaned open. My breath caught in my throat. Jason stepped out. He was still wearing his expensive dinner jacket, but he looked disheveled. He looked around nervously, checking the street, his eyes passing right over my dark truck. He didn't look like a grieving husband. He looked like a man who had just finished a transaction. But he wasn't alone. A woman stepped out behind him. For a second, my heart stopped beating. I mean that literally. I felt a physical pain in my chest that stole the air from my lungs. The woman was wearing a long trench coat, belted tightly at the waist. She had silver hair cut in a bob that stopped just above her shoulders. She turned her head to say something to Jason, and the light from the yellow bulb caught her profile. It was Catherine. I reached for the door handle, ready to throw myself out of the truck. It was impossible. I had buried Catherine. I had held her hand until it turned cold. But my eyes were telling me that my wife was standing on a sidewalk in the south side of Chicago smoking a cigarette. Then she laughed. It was a harsh, rasping laugh. The sound of a smoker, deep and gravelly. It was not Catherine's laugh. Catherine's laugh had been like wind chimes, light and musical. This woman laughed like an engine trying to turn over in winter. She took a drag from her cigarette and stepped into the light. I saw her face clearly now. The illusion shattered. The structure of the face was similar, yes. High cheekbones, the same nose, but the skin was rougher, the eyes were harder, and there was a bitterness etched into the lines around her mouth that Catherine never had. My phone buzzed again. Mike had sent an image file. I opened it. It was a dossier. A profile of the woman standing 50 feet away from me. Her name was Vanessa Rayburn, 52 years old, former stage actress. She had a rap sheet that scrolled down my screen. Petty theft, check fraud, and 2 counts of insurance fraud involving staged accidents. I looked up from the screen to the woman. Jason handed her an envelope. It was thick. Cash. Vanessa took it, thumbed through the bills quickly, and tucked it into her coat. Then she did something that made my blood boil. She reached up and adjusted her hair, tilting her head exactly the way Catherine used to when she was listening to someone. She walked a few steps, mimicking Catherine's stride, that distinct, slightly quick pace of a woman who was always busy. It was a performance. I realized with a sickening clarity what I was watching. Jason hadn't built an AI. He hadn't written code. He had hired an actress. He had found a woman who bore a passing resemblance to my dead wife, a desperate woman with a criminal record and a need for quick cash. He was coaching her. He was paying her to learn Catherine's mannerisms, her walk, her silhouette. This wasn't technology. This was theater. Cruel, expensive theater designed for an audience of one. My daughter. I watched Jason say something final to Vanessa. He pointed a finger at her, aggressive and demanding. She nodded, looking bored, and flicked her cigarette butt into the gutter. Jason turned and walked toward his Mercedes, which was parked further down the block. Vanessa turned and disappeared back into the dark mouth of the tenement building. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The engineer in me was analyzing the load-bearing capacity of this scheme. Why go to this length? Why hire a physical double in AI voice on a phone is one thing. A physical presence is high risk. It means they intend to escalate. It means a voice isn't enough anymore. They need Emily to see something. They need to break her reality completely. Jason drove away, his taillights fading into the gloom. Mike pulled out to follow him, sending me a quick text. I have got him. Go home, Thomas. But I couldn't go home. I couldn't just go back to my empty house and sleep while this charade played out. I sat there for another hour, staring at the door where the imposter lived. I memorized the address. I memorized the layout of the street. I was already calculating the next step. I was about to start the engine when my phone rang. It was 3:12 a.m. The screen lit up with Emily's name. A cold dread washed over me. I knew instinctively that this wasn't a casual call. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. Emily. Dad. Her voice was a whisper, a terrified, broken sound that scraped against my soul. Dad. Are you awake? I am here, honey. I am awake. What is wrong? I don't know what to do, she stammered. Her breathing was fast and shallow, the sound of a panic attack in full swing. I locked myself in the bedroom. Jason isn't home. He said he had to go to the office for an emergency. I closed my eyes. He wasn't at the office. He was driving away from a drug deal with a ghost. "Emily, listen to me. You are safe. The doors are locked." "No, Dad," she sobbed, and the sound was so full of pure primal fear that it made the hair on my arms stand up. "The doors are locked. But she is inside." "Who is inside, Emily, Mom?" she whispered. The word hung in the silence of the truck cabin. "Dad." I heard her. I heard her walking downstairs. The floorboards. You know how she used to walk. That click-click of her heels. I heard it. And then... She paused, choking on a sob. "And then what, Emily?" I opened the door. "Just a crack, Dad." I looked down into the hallway. The lights were off, but the moonlight was coming through the window. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs. My grip on the phone tightened. I knew exactly who was standing at the bottom of the stairs. I knew exactly how much Jason had paid her to be there. She was wearing her blue dress, Dad, Emily cried. The one she was buried in. She looked up at me. She didn't have a face, Dad. It was just shadow. But she pointed at me. She pointed at me, and she told me I was being a bad daughter. She told me I had to fix it. "Emily, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning through my veins. "That is not your mother. Do you hear me? That is not Catherine. It is her, Emily." Screamed, losing control. "She is here. She is angry because I haven't given Jason the money. She says I am selfish. She says I am letting the family down." The line went dead for a second, and then I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. Through the phone in the background, I heard a faint rhythmic knocking. "Dad, she is coming up the stairs," Emily whispered. "Stay in the room, Emily. Lock the door. Push the dresser in front of it. Do not open it for anyone, not even Jason." "Dad, help me. I am coming, Emily. I am coming right now." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and slammed the truck into gear. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I peeled away from the curb. I didn't care about speed limits. I didn't care about red lights. Jason had made his move. He wasn't waiting for the birthday. He was accelerating the timeline. He was terrorizing my daughter in her own home using a paid actress to drive her into a psychological breakdown so she would sign over her assets. It was a brilliant evil plan. But he had made one miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a ghost story. He didn't realize he had just declared war on a man who knew how to bring down the whole house. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the engine roaring as I raced toward the highway. I wasn't an engineer anymore. Tonight, I was a father coming to kill a monster. I slammed the truck into park before the wheels even stopped rolling. I did not bother with the driveway. I tore across the manicured lawn. Jason was so proud of the tires leaving deep, muddy scars in the perfect green grass. The front door of the house was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind like a gaping mouth. Inside, the house was dark. Not the comforting darkness of a sleeping home, but a staged, theatrical darkness. The only light came from the flickering candles scattered across the living room floor, and the pale blue glow of the moonlight streaming through the high windows. I did not call out. I moved fast. I followed the sound of the sobbing. It was a raw, guttural sound that no father should ever have to hear coming from his child. I found them in the master bedroom. Emily was not on the bed. She was pushed into the corner of the room, wedged between the heavy oak wardrobe and the wall, as if she were trying to merge with the plaster. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her hands clawing at her hair. She was rocking back and forth, her eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on a spot in the center of the room that was completely empty. Jason was there, of course. He was kneeling beside her, his arms wrapped around her shoulders. To an outsider, it would have looked like a tender scene. A loving husband comforting his terrified wife. But I was not an outsider. I was an engineer who knew how to spot stress fractures, and I saw the way his fingers were digging into her arm. He was not holding her. He was restraining her. He looked up when I entered, his face a perfect mask of exhaustion and worry. "Thank God you are here, Thomas," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "She is having a complete break. I can't get her to calm down." I ignored him. I dropped to my knees on the other side of Emily. "Emily," I said softly, "I am here. Dad is here. Look at me." She did not look at me. She pointed a trembling finger at the empty space in the center of the room. "She is still there, Dad," Emily whispered, her teeth chattering. "Can't you see her? She is standing right there. She is wearing the blue dress, the one with the blood on it." There was no one there. But the air in the room was freezing. The window was open, and then I saw it. Movement, just a flicker of shadow in the hallway mirror that reflected the kitchen downstairs. I saw the back door ease shut. I saw the hem of a beige trench coat disappear into the night. Vanessa. Jason had timed it perfectly. He had kept the actress here just long enough to shatter Emily's mind and signaled her to leave the second he heard my truck engine. He caught me looking at the door. He didn't panic. He just blinked a slow, deliberate movement and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a warning. If I chased her, I left Emily alone with him. If I stayed, the evidence vanished. He had me checkmated. I turned back to my daughter. "Emily, honey, listen to me. That is not Mom. Mom is at peace. That was a trick. No." Emily screamed, shrinking away from me. She pushed my hand away as if my touch burned her. "Do not lie to me anymore, Dad." She told me everything." "What did she tell you?" I asked, feeling a cold pit open in my stomach. Jason tightened his grip on her, pulling her closer to him. "Shh, baby, don't say it. You are upset." "Let her speak, Jason," I snarled. Emily looked at me with eyes full of betrayal. It was the same look her mother used to give me when I worked late on Christmas Eve, but twisted into something horrifying. "She said you are the one hurting her." Emily sobbed. "She said her soul is trapped. She said she cannot move on because you tampered with the will. She said you stole the money that was supposed to be for our future children. She said you are hoarding it because you hate Jason, because you want us to fail." The accusation hit me harder than a physical blow. It was so precise. It targeted my deepest insecurity that I was a cold, distant provider and weaponized it. "I never touched the will, Emily," I said, my voice shaking. "Everything I have is for you." "Liar," she shrieked. She said the only way to free her is for me to take control. I have to make it right. I have to sign the papers. If I don't, she will haunt this house forever. She said she is cold, Dad. She said she is so cold because of you." She buried her face in Jason's chest, wailing. Jason looked at me over her trembling body. His face was tragic, but his eyes were dancing with triumph. He stroked her hair, making soothing, shushing noises. "You see what I am dealing with," Jason said quietly. "She has been like this for hours. Hallucinating, paranoia. It is exactly what Dr. Evans warned us about." "Dr. Evans?" I asked. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. A psychiatrist Jason played golf with. A man who had lost his license in Florida for overprescribing opioids before moving to Chicago. "Yes," Jason continued, his voice smooth as silk. "I called him when this started. He said this is a classic psychotic break induced by financial stress. Emily feels powerless, Thomas. She feels like a child in your shadow. Her subconscious is projecting that fear as her mother." He paused, waiting for the words to sink in. "Dr. Evans suggests we need to remove the trigger immediately," Jason said. "We need to show her subconscious that she is in control." "And how do you propose we do that?" I asked, standing up slowly. My knees cracked. I felt every year of my age, but my mind was sharpening into a blade. Jason reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document. It was thick. Legal paper. I had my lawyer draw this up just in case, Jason said. It is a temporary power of attorney and a transfer of guardianship for the trust. If Emily signs this, if she feels that she officially owns her assets, the doctor thinks the hallucinations will stop. It is a therapeutic measure, Thomas. Just to help her sleep. We can reverse it later when she is better. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Jason. He wasn't just a thief. He was an architect of destruction. He had built this entire night, the fake ghost, the phone call, the terror, all to lead to this one moment. He wanted me to watch my daughter sign away her life to him, and he wanted me to believe it was the only way to save her sanity. If I refused, I was the monster keeping her in the nightmare. If I agreed, I handed him $18 million and the power to lock her away in an institution whenever he pleased. Emily looked up at me, tear-stained and broken. "Please, Dad," she whispered. "Just let me sign it. I want Mommy to go away. I want her to stop screaming." I looked at the pen in Jason's hand. It was poised ready. I knew I could not fight him with logic. Not here. Not while Emily was in this state. Logic does not work on fear. I needed to buy time. I needed to disrupt the frequency. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I made myself look smaller, older, defeated. "Let me see the papers," I said softly. Jason's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected me to fold so fast. He held the document out. I took it. I pretended to read the first page. My mind was racing, calculating the structural weakness of the room, the position of the exits, the location of my phone. "You are right, Jason," I said. "She needs peace." "Exactly." Jason smiled. "It is for the best." But I added, pausing. "This document requires a witness, a notary. You know that, Jason. Without a notary, the bank won't accept it. And it is 3 a.m. Jason's smile faltered. "I have a guy," he said quickly. "He is on his way." "Of course you do," I thought. "Then we wait," I said, sitting down in the armchair in the corner. "I am not leaving her, Jason. If you want her to sign, we do it properly. But until your notary gets here, nobody signs anything." I crossed my legs. I settled in. I saw the frustration flicker in Jason's eyes. He wanted it done now in the heat of the hysteria. Delay was his enemy. Adrenaline fades. Fear becomes exhaustion. I looked at my watch. I wasn't waiting for a notary. I was waiting for the sun to rise. Because ghosts have a harder time operating in the daylight. And I was waiting for the text message I had secretly sent to Mike while I was walking up the stairs. The text had 3 words: "Bring the audio." Jason thought he had trapped me in a corner. He didn't realize I was just inspecting the walls for the demolition charges. I walked out of my daughter's house and the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. It sounded like the lock of a prison cell. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the silence of the night. The screaming had stopped. The house was dark again. To anyone passing by, it was just another quiet, affluent home in the suburbs. But I knew better. I knew there was a monster inside, and I had just left my only child alone with him. I wanted to turn back. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to kick down the door and drag Emily out by force. But I stopped myself. I am an engineer. I know that if you apply force to a structure that is already compromising, you do not fix it. You cause a collapse. Emily was fragile. If I dragged her out now, she would hate me. She would run back to him the first chance she got, convinced that I was the villain and he was the savior. No. I needed to dismantle the foundation of Jason's control. And to do that, I needed to know exactly what kind of weight was crushing him. I got into my truck. My hands were steady on the wheel, But my jaw was clenched so tight, my teeth ached. I drove home in silence. I did not speed. I drove with the cold, mechanical precision of a man on a mission. When I got back to my house, I went straight to the basement. I poured the cold coffee down the sink and opened a bottle of bourbon. I poured 2 fingers, drank it neat, and felt the burn settle in my chest. Then I sat down at my workstation. The screens flickered to life. The blue light washed over my hands. Jason thought he was smart. He thought because he wore Italian suits and used buzzwords like blockchain and leverage that he was sophisticated. But he was a tourist in the world of money. I have been navigating these waters for 40 years. I know that money always leaves a trail. It is like water. It flows, it pools, and if you look hard enough, you can find the leak. I pulled up the credit report I had started running earlier. It was a standard consumer report. Clean. A few late payments on a credit card, a car lease. Nothing that explained the desperation I saw in his eyes. Nothing that explained hiring an actress to impersonate a ghost. I needed to go deeper. I picked up my secure line and dialed a number with a 702 area code. Las Vegas. It was 4 in the morning there. The man who answered did not sound asleep. He sounded like he was in the middle of a casino floor. Bennett, the voice barked. You are calling me on the bat phone. This better be good. I need a favor, Saul, I said. I need you to run a name through the private database, the one the casinos share with the loan agencies, the one that doesn't show up on Experian. Who is the mark? Saul asked. Jason Miller, my son-in-law. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Your son-in-law. You sure you want to know, Thomas? Sometimes ignorance is cheaper. Run it, I said. I waited. I heard the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. I stared at the cursor blinking on my own screen. The seconds stretched out like hours. I thought about Emily cowering in the corner. I thought about the fake Catherine pointing her finger. He is in deep. Thomas Saul's voice came back devoid of humor now. How deep he is flagged in 3 major houses, but that is not the problem. The casinos cut him off 6 months ago. He moved to private games, underground tables. Give me the number, Saul. He owes $2.4 million. The number hit me like a physical weight. $2.4 million. That wasn't bad luck. That wasn't a bad investment. That was a sickness. That was a man trying to fill a black hole inside himself with chips and cards. Who holds the paper? I asked. A shell company called Silver State Holdings, Saul said. But you and I both know who that is. It is the outfit that runs out of the back of the Stardust Strip Club. These guys are not bankers, Thomas. They don't send overdue notices. They send guys with baseball bats. And they don't have a grace period. When is it due? Saul hesitated. The note says the deadline is next Tuesday. If he doesn't pay in full, the interest rate jumps to 50%. And if he doesn't pay the interest, well, let's just say his life expectancy drops significantly. I thanked Saul and hung up. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with terrifying clarity. Next Tuesday. That was why everything was happening so fast. Jason didn't care about the crypto project. He didn't care about Emily's mental health. He didn't even care about the $500,000 he asked me for at dinner. That was just a desperate attempt to pay the interest to buy himself another week of breathing room. When I said no, he panicked. He realized he was out of options. He was a dead man walking. So he accelerated the plan. Emily's trust fund. I had set up that trust when Emily was born. It was worth $5 million today. But it was locked. Emily could only access the interest, not the principal, unless there was a medical emergency or unless she was declared mentally incompetent and her legal guardian authorized the liquidation for her care. The ghost. The gaslighting. The psychiatrist who lost his license. The power of attorney document he tried to force her to sign tonight. It was all a play for the principal. He needed to break Emily's mind so he could legally steal her $5 million. He was going to use my daughter's sanity to pay off a gambling debt to the Vegas mob. He was willing to put her in a mental institution for the rest of her life just to save his own skin. A cold fury rose in me, colder than the Chicago wind outside. This wasn't just a bad marriage anymore. This was a hostage situation. And the ransom was my daughter's life. I looked at the date on my computer. It was Friday morning. He had 4 days. 4 days before the sharks came for him. And in those 4 days, he would be the most dangerous thing on earth. A desperate animal will chew through its own leg to escape a trap. Jason would chew through Emily. I started typing. I needed to build a dossier. I needed proof of the debt. I needed the connection to the actress. I needed to link the psychiatrist to the scheme. I was going to bury him under a mountain of evidence so heavy he would never see daylight again. I was so focused on the screen that I didn't hear the car pull up outside. I didn't hear the footsteps on the pavement. The first thing I heard was the shattering of glass. It was an explosion of sound in the quiet house. Something heavy crashed through the large bay window of my living room upstairs. The security alarm started blaring instantly, a piercing siren that pulsed through the floorboards. I didn't freeze. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my desk and ran up the stairs. The living room was covered in shards of glass. The wind was howling through the jagged hole in the window, blowing the curtains wildly. Lying in the middle of the Persian rug, surrounded by glittering diamonds of broken glass, was a brick. I ran to the window, stepping over the debris. I looked out onto the street. A dark sedan was speeding away, its tires squealing as it turned the corner. No license plate, just taillights disappearing into the fog. I looked down at the brick. There was a piece of paper wrapped around it, secured with a rubber band. I picked it up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of combat. I pulled the paper free and unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, scrawled in thick black marker. "Stay out of family business, old man. Next time it won't be a rock." I stared at the note. It wasn't Jason's handwriting. It was too crude, too aggressive. He had sent someone. Maybe he had paid a local thug $100. Or maybe he had told his creditors that his rich father-in-law was the one blocking the payment. Maybe he had pointed the sharks at me. I looked out into the darkness. The alarm was still screaming, waking up the neighbors. But inside my head, it was quiet. Jason had made a fatal error. He thought this rock would scare me. He thought that by breaking my window, he would break my resolve. He thought I was just a retired engineer who would retreat to his safe room and call 911. He forgot what I used to do for a living. I dealt with forces of nature. I dealt with gravity, wind, and pressure. I knew that when a structure is attacked, you don't abandon it. You reinforce it. I crumpled the note in my fist. "You want to make this a street fight, Jason?" I whispered to the empty street. "Fine." I walked over to the security panel and punched in the code to silence the alarm. The sudden quiet was heavy. I looked at the hole in my house. It was an act of war. I turned around and walked back to the kitchen. I didn't call the police. The police would take a report. They would file it. They would tell me to get a restraining order. A piece of paper wouldn't stop a man who owed $2 million to the mob. I needed something stronger than the law. I picked up my phone and dialed Saul back. "I need another favor," I said when he answered. "You are racking up a tab, Thomas." "I need to buy a debt," I said. Silence on the other end. "What did you say? I want to buy the paper on Jason Miller," I said, my voice as hard as concrete. "I want to become the holder of the note." "How much to get Silver State Holdings to assign the debt to me, Thomas?" "You are talking about paying $2.5 million cash to criminals, just to own your son-in-law." No, I said. Not to own him. To finish him. Make the call, Saul. Tell them the money will be wired by noon. I hung up the phone. I looked at the brick on the floor. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter. And on Tuesday, when the bill came due, Jason wasn't going to face a thug with a baseball bat. He was going to face me. I did not go to the high-rise apartment where my son was hiding, nor did I drive to the corporate offices where the board of directors was waiting for my resignation. Instead, I drove my old sedan to the south side of the city, to a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the potholes were deep enough to swallow a tire. I was looking for the Neon Lounge, a dive bar that smelled of stale beer, regret, and bad decisions. I knew this was where Vanessa spent her evenings, when she wasn't whispering poison into my son's ear. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to offer a lifeline, though I knew deep down she probably wouldn't take it. I parked the car under a broken light and walked inside. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of a jukebox playing a song about lost love that no one was listening to. I spotted her immediately in a booth at the back. She was wearing a red dress that was too expensive for this place, laughing loudly at something a man in a leather jacket was saying. When she saw me approaching her, laughter died in her throat. She whispered something to the man, and he slid out of the booth, giving me a hard look, before disappearing toward the bar. I sat down opposite her. The vinyl seat was cracked and sticky. Vanessa lit a cigarette, blowing the smoke directly into my face. She didn't look scared. She looked bored, arrogant, like a woman who believes she holds all the cards. She asked me what I was doing there, her voice dripping with that same condescension I had heard too many times from my own son. She called me Thomas, dropping the Mr. stripping away any pretense of respect. I didn't answer her immediately. I placed a small silver suitcase on the table between us. It was heavy. I unlocked the latches with a loud click that cut through the ambient noise of the bar. I opened the lid just enough for her to see the stacks of bills inside. Her eyes widened, the boredom vanishing, instantly replaced by a hunger so raw it was almost painful to watch. I told her there was $50,000 in that case. Cash. Untraceable. I told her it was enough to pay off her credit card debts, enough to get a fresh start in another city, enough to walk away from Jason and this mess before the walls came crumbling down. I watched her face carefully. For a second, I saw hesitation. I saw the part of her that was tired of running, tired of the schemes, but then a slow, cruel smile spread across her lips. She reached out and closed the lid of the suitcase, pushing it back toward me. She took a long drag of her cigarette and leaned in close. She told me that $50,000 was an insult. She said my son, my foolish and ambitious Jason, had promised her $500,000. She said it with such certainty, such conviction. She told me that once their plan went through, once they had stripped my company of its assets and sold off the client list, she would be half a millionaire. I felt a wave of pity for her and for Jason. She didn't realize that Jason didn't have $500,000 to give. She didn't realize he was lying to her just as much as he was lying to me. They were two drowning people trying to use each other as a raft. I tried one last time. I spoke softly. I told her that Jason was not going to win. I told her that the money he promised didn't exist. I told her that when the authorities came, Jason would throw her to the wolves to save himself, because that is how he was raised, not by me, but by the entitlement I had failed to curb. I told her this $50,000 was the only real money she was ever going to see from the Vance family. Vanessa laughed. It was a harsh, metallic sound. She picked up her drink, a glass full of cheap vodka and melting ice. She looked at me with eyes that were completely dead to reason. She told me I was old. She said I was a dinosaur who didn't understand how the modern world worked. She said I was weak because I still believed in honor and loyalty. She told me to take my pennies and go buy a burial plot because that was the only piece of real estate I needed to worry about. Then she did it. With a flick of her wrist, she threw the contents of her glass into my face. The alcohol burned my eyes. The ice cubes hit my cheek like small stones. The cold liquid soaked into my shirt, dripping down my collar. The bar went silent. A few patrons turned to watch, waiting for the old man to explode, waiting for a scene. Vanessa sat back, smirking, lighting another cigarette. She told me again, "Old man, don't fight with the kids. You'll only get hurt." I sat there for a moment, letting the liquid drip from my chin. I didn't yell. I didn't overturn the table. I simply took my handkerchief from my pocket and wiped my face. The burning in my eyes subsided, replaced by a clarity as sharp as a diamond. The pity I had felt for her evaporated. The hope that I could save her or save Jason from her influence turned to ash. I had come here as a father and a man of mercy. I was leaving as a CEO and a man of war. I closed the latches of the suitcase. I stood up slowly, straightening my wet jacket. I looked at her, really looked at her one last time. I saw her for what she was. Not a mastermind, not a partner, but a parasite. And you do not negotiate with parasites. You remove them. I told her in a voice so low and steady that she stopped smiling, that I had given her a chance to choose a side. I had given her an exit ramp. I told her that she had made her choice and now she would have to live with the consequences. She tried to laugh it off, tried to maintain that air of superiority, but I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes as I turned my back on her. She shouted something after me, something about how I was finished, but I kept walking. I walked out of the neon lounge and into the cool night air. The street was empty. My car sat under the broken light, looking tired and worn, much like its owner. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I didn't start the engine immediately. I took out my phone. My hand was steady. I dialed the number of my personal attorney, a man named Arthur, who had been with me since the beginning. A man who knew where all the bodies were buried, because he had helped me dig the graves legally, of course. He answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't tell him about the drink in my face or the insult to my age. I simply told him 2 words. Activate Plan B. Arthur didn't ask questions. He didn't ask if I was sure. He knew what Plan B meant. It meant the scorched earth policy. It meant releasing the forensic audits I had been holding back. It meant contacting the fraud division. It meant freezing every asset, every account, every credit card associated with my name, including the ones Jason and Vanessa were using to fund their rebellion. It meant that by tomorrow morning, the $500,000 Vanessa was dreaming of would be nothing more than a fantasy, and the $50,000 she had rejected would seem like a king's ransom. I started the car. The engine roared to life, a strong, reliable sound. I wasn't finished. I wasn't a dinosaur. I was the meteor. And as I drove away from the south side, leaving Vanessa to her cheap vodka and expensive delusions, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. The time for mercy was over. The lesson was about to begin. The envelope arrived by courier at 9 in the morning. It was a thick, heavy package that smelled of official stationery and impending doom. I did not need to open it to know what was inside, but I sat at my desk and sliced the seal with a letter opener anyway. The papers were cold in my hands. It was a petition for an emergency conservatorship. My son Jason, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and tie his shoes, was asking a judge to strip his sister of her basic human rights. I read the affidavit slowly, forcing myself to absorb every poisonous word. Jason had painted a picture of Emily that was unrecognizable to anyone who truly knew her. He claimed she was unstable. He cited instances of paranoia that were actually moments of clarity. He twisted her grief over her mother into a diagnosis of clinical depression with suicidal tendencies. He wrote that she had threatened to harm herself, a lie so blatant it made my hands shake. He claimed she was incapable of managing her own finances or making medical decisions. And the masterstroke was how he portrayed me. He described me as an enabler, an elderly father suffering from cognitive decline who was exacerbating her condition. My lawyer Arthur was pacing back and forth in my study, his face flushed with anger. He wanted to file a counter-motion immediately. He wanted to storm the courthouse and expose Jason's lies before the ink was dry. He slammed his fist on my desk and told me we could not let this stand. He said if the judge granted this, Jason would have total control. He could institutionalize Emily. He could medicate her into oblivion. He could block me from ever seeing her again. I sat there looking at the signature on the bottom of the page. It was Jason's signature, bold and looping the same way he signed birthday cards. I took a deep breath and told Arthur to sit down. I told him we were not going to file a counter-motion. We were not going to appear in court to contest it. We were going to do absolutely nothing. Arthur looked at me as if I had lost my mind. He asked me if I understood the stakes. He asked if I was giving up. I looked him in the eye and told him that I was not giving up. I was giving Jason exactly what he wanted. I was giving him enough rope to hang himself. If we fought him now, it would be a messy domestic dispute. It would be his word against mine. The judge might hesitate, or he might appoint a neutral third party, which would slow everything down. But if we let Jason win, if we let him think he had outsmarted the old man, his arrogance would blind him. He would feel invincible. And an invincible man makes mistakes. An invincible man gets careless. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Since it was an emergency petition, it was ex parte, meaning they didn't even need us there to make a temporary ruling. I stayed home. I sat in my armchair by the window and watched the rain fall, imagining the scene in the courtroom. I could see Jason wearing his best suit, putting on that mask of the concerned, burdened brother. I could hear him telling the judge how hard it was for him to take this step, how much he loved his sister, how he only wanted to save her. By 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. The judge had granted the temporary conservatorship. Jason was now effectively Emily's legal guardian. He had the power to control her movements, her associations, and her assets. Legally, I was now a stranger to my own daughter. A heavy silence settled over the house. It was the kind of silence that screams. I felt a physical ache in my chest, a deep gnawing fear for Emily. I knew she would be terrified. She would feel abandoned. She would think I had failed her. I had to trust that she was strong enough to hold on for just a little longer. I had to trust that the seeds of doubt I had planted in her mind earlier would keep her alert. I had to sacrifice the battle to win the war. I spent the evening reviewing the files Arthur and I had compiled. The bank transfers, the shell companies, the evidence of Jason's debts. I looked at the photos the private investigator had taken. I looked at the timeline of events. It was all there. But I needed one more thing. I needed Jason to make an overt act of malice while he thought he was untouchable. I needed him to show his true face when he thought no one was watching. The sun went down and the room filled with shadows. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there waiting. I knew the call would come. Jason wouldn't be able to resist the urge to gloat. He needed to hear the defeat in my voice. He needed to confirm that I was broken. At 8 o'clock, the phone rang. The screen lit up with his name. I let it ring 3 times before picking it up. I didn't say hello, I just listened. Jason's voice was smooth, almost cheerful. He didn't mention the court order right away. He asked how I was doing. He asked if I had had a quiet day. The cruelty was subtle, wrapped in faux concern. He told me he had some good news. He said the court had agreed that Emily needed help. He said he was going to make sure she got the best care possible, implying that my care had been insufficient. I kept my voice low and weary. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I sounded like a man who had been beaten. I asked him what happened next. He paused, savoring the moment. He told me that things were going to change. He said he was going to bring in some specialists to evaluate Emily. He said he was going to secure the house to make sure she didn't hurt herself. And then his tone shifted. It became darker, more intimate. He told me that they were holding a small gathering tomorrow night at the house. He called it a seance. He said they had found a medium, someone who could help Emily find closure with Mom. He said it was going to be a final farewell, a way to put the past to rest so they could move forward. I felt a chill run down my spine. A seance. It was absurd, theatrical, and deeply manipulative. Jason didn't believe in spirits. He believed in leverage. He was going to use my wife's memory, the one sacred thing we all shared, to terrorize Emily. He was going to stage a performance to break her spirit completely. He invited me to come. His invitation wasn't out of kindness. It was a summons. He wanted me to be there to witness his triumph. He wanted me to watch as he took full possession of the family legacy. He lowered his voice to a whisper, the mask of the concerned brother slipping just enough to reveal the monster underneath. He told me I should come to say my goodbyes. He said it would be a chance to say goodbye to Mom, and to say goodbye to the way things used to be. He paused for effect, and then delivered the line that made my blood run cold. He told me to come say goodbye to both of them, implying that after tonight, Emily would no longer be my daughter, but his property. I held the phone tight, my knuckles turning white. I forced myself to breathe. I forced myself to swallow the rage that threatened to choke me. I told him I would be there. I told him I wouldn't miss it for the world. He laughed, a short, sharp sound, and hung up. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked out into the darkness. Jason thought he had won. He thought the legal paper in his pocket was a shield. He didn't know that he had just invited the wolf into the sheepfold. He didn't know it by inviting me into that house. He was giving me the stage for his own destruction. I stood up and walked to the safe in the corner of the room. I dialed the combination, and the heavy door swung open. I wasn't reaching for a weapon, not the kind that fires bullets. I reached for a small black digital recorder and a file folder marked with red tape. Tomorrow night, there would be ghosts, yes, but they wouldn't be the ones Jason was expecting. Tomorrow night, the ghost of justice was coming to dinner. The morning after Jason's phone call was a blur of calculated activity. I didn't sleep. Sleep is for men who have peace of mind, and right now I was a man at war. I drove to a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district to meet Mike, my private investigator. Mike was already there, waiting by a workbench covered in equipment that looked more suited for a film set than a tactical operation. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes asked the question his mouth didn't need to speak. I nodded. We were going through with it. On the table there were no guns, no knives, no physical weapons of any kind. Instead, there were high lumen projectors capable of throwing a clear image against a wall from 50 feet away. There were directional speakers that could focus sound into a tight beam, making a whisper sound like it was coming from right beside your ear, even if the source was across the room. And there was a small black box with a single antenna, a signal jammer, military grade. Mike ran me through the setup one last time. He explained how we would cut the main power to the house, how the backup generators would kick in, but only for the essential systems, leaving the main halls in darkness. He showed me how the remote triggers worked. It was a high-tech haunted house kit designed to terrify the guilty. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the projector. Jason wanted a seance. He wanted to summon spirits to manipulate his sister. Well, I was going to give him a show he would never forget. I was going to use his own superstition and guilt against him. But the theater was only half the battle. I needed leverage. Absolute, undeniable leverage. I left Mike to finish the preparations and drove to the other side of town. I had a meeting scheduled with a man named Sal. Sal ran a legitimate construction business on paper, but everyone in the city knew he was the man you went to when the banks said no. He was the man holding Jason's debt. The meeting took place in the back office of a cement yard. The air was thick with dust and the smell of wet concrete. Sal was a large man with hands like shovels. He looked surprised to see me. He knew who I was, of course. He knew I was the father of the fool who owed him $2.4 million. He probably thought I was there to beg for more time or to negotiate a payment plan. I didn't sit down. I stood in front of his desk and placed a cashier's check on the blotter. Sal looked at the number and his eyebrows shot up. $2.4 million, paid in full. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and confusion. He asked why I was bailing out the kid. He said Jason was a bad investment. I looked Sal in the eye and told him I wasn't bailing anyone out. I was making a purchase. I told him I wanted the debt assignment papers signed over to me. I wanted to be the legal holder of that note. Sal paused for a moment, processing what I was saying. A slow smile spread across his face. He understood. This wasn't an act of charity. It was a hostile takeover. He signed the papers, pushing the thick stack of documents toward me. As I walked out of that cement yard, I held the folder tight against my chest. In that folder was my son's life. He didn't owe the mob anymore. He didn't owe a faceless criminal organization. He owed me. And unlike Sal, I wasn't interested in the interest rates. I was interested in the principle. I was interested in the fact that I could now legally foreclose on everything Jason touched if he didn't pay up immediately. And I knew he couldn't pay. The sky was turning a bruised purple by the time I got back to my own house. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally breaking. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the window panes. I walked into the living room and went straight to the mantel. There, sitting in a silver frame, was a photo of Catherine, my late wife. She was smiling that soft, knowing smile that used to calm my worst tempers. I poured myself a glass of whiskey. It was the good stuff, the bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. I didn't drink to celebrate. I drank to steel my nerves. I looked at Catherine's face. I spoke to her aloud, my voice raspy in the empty room. I told her I was sorry for what I had to do. I told her that our son had lost his way so completely that words could no longer reach him. I told her that he was hurting Emily and that I couldn't allow it. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned going down, warming my chest. I told her that tonight wasn't about vengeance. It was about cleaning the slate. It was about removing the rot so that whatever was left of our family could survive. I whispered the words into the glass. Tonight, I take out the trash, Catherine. I finished the drink and set the glass down next to her picture. I didn't put on my suit. I didn't dress like the CEO or the wealthy retiree. I went to the closet and pulled out my old work jacket, the one with the frayed collar and the grease stains I could never quite get out. It was the jacket I wore when I was building the company from the ground up. It was the jacket of a man who works with his hands. I walked out to the garage. I walked past the luxury sedan and the sports car. I went to the back where my old pickup truck sat under a tarp. I pulled the cover off. The metal was dull, and there was a dent in the bumper from a job site 20 years ago. I climbed into the cab. The smell of old leather and gasoline filled my nose. It smelled like hard work. It smelled like truth. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life with a deep guttural growl. It was a beast waking up from a long hibernation. I backed out of the garage and into the driving rain. The wipers slapped rhythmically against the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel tight, my hands steady. I drove through the city streets, the rain lashing against the metal roof. I was heading toward the affluent suburb where Jason lived in the house I had paid for. I was heading into the lion's den. But I wasn't afraid. A lion is only dangerous if you play by the laws of the jungle. I was bringing the laws of physics and the laws of finance. I was bringing a storm that would wash away the lies. As the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead, I felt a strange sense of calm. The preparation was over. The talking was done. Now it was time for the ghosts to speak. The house that I had purchased for my son stood imposing against the backdrop of the storm. The rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 accusatory fingers, but inside the atmosphere was suffocatingly still. Jason had transformed the living room into something that resembled a crypt more than a home. The expensive modern furniture had been pushed against the walls covered in dark, heavy sheets. The windows were draped in black velvet, blocking out the flashes of lightning, sealing us in a bubble of artificial night. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of sage and something cloying, like rotting lilies. It was theater. Cheap, manipulative theater designed to break a fragile mind. Jason walked over to me. He was wearing black, his face arranged in a mask of solemn grief that didn't quite reach his eyes. He thanked me for coming in a whisper that was meant to sound reverent, but just sounded conspiratorial. He didn't ask about my truck or my work clothes. He didn't care. To him, I was just an extra in his production, a witness to validate the legality of what was about to happen. I walked past him to the center of the room. There, sitting in a high-backed wooden chair, was Emily. My heart clenched in my chest. She looked so small. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the flickering light of the dozens of black candles scattered around the floor. Her eyes were wide but unfocused, darting around the room, seeing things that weren't there. Jason had told me she was on medication for her anxiety, but I knew the look of heavy sedation. She was pliable. She was confused. She was a lamb brought to the slaughter. I wanted to rush to her. I wanted to shake her awake and carry her out of that house, but I forced myself to walk slowly to the corner of the room, where a single chair had been placed for me. I sat down, keeping my hands deep in the pockets of my jacket. In my right pocket, my fingers curled around the cold plastic of the remote control Mike had given me. Not yet, I told myself. I had to let them play their hand. I had to let the atrocity unfold so that when the hammer fell, it would crush them completely. A woman I didn't recognize stepped out of the shadows. She was dressed in flowing robes, her fingers laden with silver rings. This must be the medium. She introduced herself as Madame Holloway, a conduit for the other side. I recognized her type immediately. I had seen plenty of con artists in my time, but this one was particularly vile. She began to chant a low, rhythmic droning sound that seemed to vibrate off the walls. Jason sat on the floor near Emily, holding her hand. It looked like a gesture of comfort, but I saw the way his fingers dug into her wrist. He was anchoring her, trapping her. Where is Vanessa, I wondered. She was conspicuously absent, but I knew where she was. I glanced at the vents near the ceiling and the subtle distortion in the air where a hidden projector might be. She was the stage manager. She was the wizard behind the curtain. The chanting grew louder. Madame Holloway threw some powder into a brazier, and a puff of green smoke rose up, twisting in the stagnant air. The lights, which were on a dimmer switch, began to flicker. It was a classic trick wiring manipulation, but to Emily, in her drugged state, it must have looked like the veil between worlds was tearing open. She let out a small, terrified whimper. Then the sound began. It started as a low static coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jason had installed the speakers well. Out of the static, a voice emerged. It was faint at first, then clearer. My blood ran cold. It was Catherine. It was my wife's voice. I felt a surge of nausea. They had taken old home videos, voicemails, and memories, and they had fed them into an AI program. They had synthesized the voice of the woman who had loved them more than life itself, and they were using it as a weapon. Emily sat up straighter, her breath hitching in her throat. The voice called her name. Emily, it whispered. My sweet Emily. It was a perfect imitation, capturing the cadence, the warmth, even the slight lisp Catherine had when she was tired. But to my ears, it was metallic. It was hollow. It lacked the soul. Emily began to weep. She called out for her mother, her voice breaking. The AI voice responded. It said it was cold. It said it was trapped. It said it couldn't move on to the light because of the burdens left behind. This was the script Jason had written. He was guilt-tripping his sister from beyond the grave. The madame urged Emily to listen closely. The voice spoke again, louder this time, with a desperate edge. It told Emily that the house, the estate, the money, it was all heavy chains binding her spirit to the earth. It said that in order for her to find peace, Emily had to let it go. She had to release the burden. Jason reached under the chair and pulled out a leather folder. He opened it and placed it on Emily's lap. Inside was a document, a deed of transfer, a power of attorney. He placed a heavy fountain pen in her trembling hand. He leaned in close, his voice blending with the fake voice of his mother. He told her to do it for Mom. He told her it was the only way to stop her suffering. I watched Emily. Her hand was shaking so hard she could barely hold the pen. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked at Jason, then at the empty air where the voice was coming from. She was terrified of hurting her mother. She believed it. God help her, she believed it. The AI voice became more urgent. Sign it, Emily. Sign it and set me free. Sign it so I can rest. The cruelty was absolute. They were torturing her. They were breaking her heart to fill their bank accounts. I sat in the corner, a silent statue. My grip on the remote tightened until my knuckles turned white. I was memorizing every second of this, every word, every lie. I wanted to remember the exact look on Jason's face, that look of greedy anticipation mixed with contempt. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was just an old man paralyzed by grief, unable to intervene. Emily lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered just millimeters above the signature line. She sobbed a sound of pure anguish. She whispered that she was sorry. She whispered that she loved her mom. Jason couldn't wait any longer. His patience snapped. He squeezed her shoulder hard, his whisper turning into a hiss. He told her to hurry up. He said, "Look at her, she's in pain. Don't be selfish, Emily. Don't be selfish." The irony was so thick it choked me. The son who was stealing millions was calling his victim selfish. The pen touched the paper. A small dot of ink bloomed on the white page. This was the moment. This was the precipice. If she signed, the legal battle would be a nightmare. If she signed, Jason won this round. I didn't stand up. I didn't shout. I simply moved my thumb. I felt the textured surface of the button on the remote. The button that would kill the power. The button that would cut the audio. The button that would signal Mike to unleash hell. The room was heavy with the expectation of the signature. The medium was leaning forward. Jason was practically holding his breath. Vanessa, hidden in the walls, was probably already celebrating. I took a deep breath. I looked at the back of Jason's head. I looked at the trembling form of my daughter. And I pressed the button. The room was plunged into sudden, heavy silence as the main breakers tripped exactly as I had signaled. The holographic projection of my wife flickered and vanished into thin air, leaving only the smell of ozone and the dying flames of the black candles. The artificial voice that had been tormenting my daughter. Cut off mid-sentence, replaced by the sound of the rain hammering against the roof. The spell was broken not by magic, but by a simple disruption of the electrical current. I stood up from my chair in the corner. The movement was slow and deliberate. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a sound that seemed incredibly loud in the sudden quiet. I saw Jason blink his eyes, adjusting to the dimness. He looked confused, then annoyed, his head snapping toward the hidden control booth where he thought the technical glitch originated. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his sister. He was just a stage director whose play had gone wrong. "Wait," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that froze everyone in the room. I walked toward the center of the circle, my heavy boots thudding against the hardwood. I looked at Emily. She was blinking rapidly, the sudden absence of the hypnotic voice creating a vacuum in her mind. I told her that her mother had one more thing to say, but this time the message wasn't coming from the other side. It was coming from the very real, very dirty world we were living in right now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black box Mike had given me, the signal jammer. I placed it on the table next to the unsigned deed. A tiny red light pulsed on its side. I explained calmly that this device blocked all wireless transmissions within a 50-foot radius. That meant no more remote-controlled lights, no more hidden speakers, and no more instructions being fed to the fraud sitting in the corner wearing the robes. The medium, Madame Halloway, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting toward the door. Jason stood up, his face darkening with a mixture of fear and rage. He asked me what I was doing. He told me I was ruining the ceremony. He tried to sound authoritative, but his voice cracked. He was losing control, and he knew it. I ignored him. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my own digital recorder. I told Emily that I had brought my own medium tonight. I told her that spirits don't live in machines, but truth sometimes does. I pressed the play button. The volume was turned up to the maximum. The voice that filled the room was not the synthesized, hollow tone of her dead mother. It was the sharp, arrogant voice of her brother. The quality was crystal clear. It was the recording Mike had captured just 2 days ago in that dive bar, the conversation between Jason and Vanessa that sealed his fate. "My wife is an idiot," the recording of Jason sneered. The sound bounced off the walls, grotesque and undeniable. "Just scare her a little more with the ghost stuff, and she will sign anything. Once this is done, I will toss you 500,000. I walk away with 5 million and full control of the estate. She is so medicated she won't even know what hit her." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world shattering. Emily sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, the pen slipping from her fingers and rolling onto the floor with a soft clatter. The drug-induced fog in her eyes began to clear, replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. She looked at the brother she had trusted, the brother she had leaned on, and for the first time she saw the wolf beneath the skin. Jason went pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at the recorder, then at me, then at Emily. The mask of the grieving son had fallen away, leaving only the naked greed of a desperate man. And then the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. From behind the wall panel where the ventilation system was accessed, there was a loud crash. Vanessa panicked by the jammer cutting her audio feed, and hearing her own voice being played back in the room, had tried to move. She stumbled in the darkness of her hiding spot. A heavy brass candelabra fell over with a deafening clang. The hidden door popped open, and Vanessa spilled out into the room. She was holding a microphone and a tablet tangled in wires. She looked disheveled, her eyes wide with shock, as she realized she had just walked onto the center stage of her own destruction. She looked at Jason, then at me, and scrambled to stand up, smoothing her dress, as if dignity was something she could still claim. Emily let out a sound that I will never forget. It was a gasp that turned into a sob of pure betrayal. She pushed the chair back and stood up, her legs shaky but holding. She looked at the woman she had called a sister-in-law, the woman hiding in the walls like a rat, and then she looked at Jason. The look she gave him was not one of sadness. It was one of disgust. Jason saw that look. He saw his $5 million dissolving into mist. He saw the prison bars closing in. Panic took over. The animal instinct to survive at any cost kicked in. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg. He attacked. He let out a guttural roar and lunged across the room toward me. His eyes were fixed on the recorder in my hand. He wanted to destroy the evidence. He wanted to silence the truth. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. Emily screamed, but I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I had spent 40 years on construction sites. I had faced down union bosses, corrupt inspectors, and shifting foundations. I was 72 years old, yes. My joints ached when it rained and I couldn't run a marathon anymore. But I was not frail. As Jason reached for me, his hands clawing for the device, I shifted my weight. I gripped the handle of my heavy oak cane, the one I had carried since my knee surgery. I didn't use it to support myself. I used it as an extension of my will. With a swift, practiced motion, I swung the cane in a low arc. The wood connected with Jason's shins with a sickening crack. He cried out, his legs buckling under him instantly. Momentum carried him forward, and he crashed face first onto the floor at my feet. He groaned, rolling over, clutching his leg, looking up at me with shock and pain. He couldn't believe the old man had struck him. He couldn't believe he was on the ground. I stood over him, breathing steadily. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a titan. I tapped the tip of the cane against his chest hard enough to bruise, keeping him pinned to the floor. I looked deep into his eyes, which were now filled with fear. I spoke clearly, so that everyone in the room, the fake medium, the treacherous wife, and my awakened daughter, could hear every syllable. I told him that he had made a fatal miscalculation. I told him that he looked at my gray hair and saw weakness. I leaned down, my face inches from his. I built skyscrapers out of steel. I growled, my voice vibrating with a lifetime of hard-earned strength. "Do you think your bones are harder than steel?" Jason stared up at me, trembling. He realized then that he hadn't just fought his father. He had fought a man made of sterner stuff than he could ever hope to be. The room was mine. The night was mine. And the reckoning had only just begun. Jason lay on the floor, clutching his shin, his face twisted in a mask of pain and shock. He looked up at me, but he didn't see the father who had raised him. He saw a stranger made of granite. I didn't offer him a hand to help him up. I didn't offer him pity. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick blue folder. I let it drop from my hand. It landed squarely on his chest with a heavy thud, sliding off to rest against his arm. He looked at the folder, confusing, clouding his eyes. He recognized the logo on the front. It was from the holding company in Las Vegas, the shell corporation used by the loan sharks he had been running from for months. He opened it with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the documents, and I saw the color drain from his face until he was as white as the paper he was holding. He saw the transfer of debt. He saw the signature at the bottom. My signature. I spoke to him in a voice that was calm and cold, the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. I told him that I had bought his life. I told him that the $2.4 million he owed to the kind of men who break legs for sport now belonged to me. I was his creditor. I was the one holding the leash around his neck. Jason tried to speak, but I cut him off. I told him he had two choices, and he needed to listen very carefully, because I was only going to say this once. Option 1 was the law. He could confess to the fraud the elder abused, the conspiracy to embezzle, and the psychological torture of his sister. He would go to prison for a very long time. He would lose his license, his reputation, and his freedom, but he would be alive. I leaned in closer, gripping the handle of my cane. I told him option 2. I told him that if he didn't want to go to jail, I could simply wash my hands of him. I could transfer the debt back to the original owners. I could let the people in Las Vegas know that he was no longer under my protection, that he was fair game, and that I would not intervene when they came to collect according to their own brutal laws. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Jason looked at the folder, then at me. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He wasn't the mastermind anymore. He was a cornered rat. The arrogance that had defined him for years evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, weeping child. He scrambled to his knees, ignoring the pain in his leg. He crawled toward me, reaching for my pant leg. He started to cry, ugly, heaving sobs that echoed in the large room. He begged me. He called me Dad. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't mean for it to go this far. And then, true to his nature, he looked for a scapegoat. He pointed a shaking finger at Vanessa, who was standing near the overturned candelabra looking like a deer in headlights. Jason screamed that it was her fault. He said she was the one who pushed him. He said she was the one who came up with the idea of the seance because she knew how much Emily missed her mother. He said she was the one who spent all the money driving him into debt. He claimed he was just trying to keep her happy. Vanessa's eyes went wide with indignation. The fear in her face turned to venom. She wasn't going to go down alone. She stepped forward, her voice shrill and piercing. She screamed that he was a liar. She told us everything. She spilled the secrets like she was vomiting poison. She said Jason had been planning this for 2 years. She said he had been siphoning money from my company accounts long before he met her. She said he called me a senile old fool behind my back every single day. She looked at Emily and told her that Jason used to laugh about her depression, that he called her weak and pathetic. The room was filled with their accusations, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of betrayal. They were tearing each other apart, showing us exactly who they were. I stood still, watching them self-destruct. It was a disgusting display, but it was necessary. Emily needed to see this. She needed to see that their bond wasn't love. It was a parasitic pact. I looked at my daughter. She was standing by the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking, but her eyes were dry. The confusion was gone. The sorrow was gone. In their place was a cold, hard resolve that I had never seen in her before. She walked over to where Jason was kneeling. Jason stopped screaming at Vanessa and looked up at his sister. He reached out to her, his hands stained with the dust from the floor. He tried to use that soft, manipulative voice again. He told Emily that he loved her. He told her they were family. He told her to please tell me to stop, to help him. Emily looked down at him. She didn't flinch. She didn't back away. She raised her hand, and with all the strength she had left, she slapped him across the face. The sound was sharp and loud, cutting through the room like a gunshot. Jason's head snapped to the side. He froze, stunned into silence. Emily spoke, her voice low and steady. She told him to get out. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply told him to get out of her house. She told him he wasn't her brother. She told him he was a monster, and she never wanted to see his face again. Jason looked at her, holding his stinging cheek. He looked at me. He realized there was no quarter here, no mercy, no more lies to hide behind. Suddenly the room was bathed in flashes of red and blue light coming from the window. The sound of sirens cut through the storm, getting louder and louder until they stopped right outside the front door. I checked my watch. The police were right on time. I had called them the moment I got into my truck. I knew how this night would end. Heavy footsteps pounded on the porch, and the front door burst open. Uniformed officers poured into the hallway, their radios crackling. I stepped back, pointing my cane at Jason and Vanessa. I told the officers that these were the trespassers. I told them these were the people attempting to defraud a vulnerable woman. Jason panicked. He tried to stand up, tried to run toward the back door, but his injured leg gave out. 2 officers were on him in a second. They pinned him to the ground, pulling his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I had heard in years. Jason started screaming. He screamed my name. He screamed for a lawyer. He screamed that it was a mistake. He was thrashing, crying, begging a man whose entire world had collapsed in the span of an hour. Vanessa was crying silently as another officer led her away. Her head hung low. I watched them drag my son out into the rain. I felt a deep, aching sadness in my heart, the kind that only a parent can feel when they realize they have failed to raise a good man. But beneath the sadness, there was relief. It was over. The cancer had been cut out. I turned to Emily. She was still standing in the center of the room, watching the open door. I walked over to her and opened my arms. She collapsed into me, burying her face in my chest, sobbing. But these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. I held her tight, stroking her hair, whispering that she was safe now. I told her that the ghosts were gone. The house was quiet again, save for the sound of the rain and the beating of our own hearts. We had survived the storm. Now we had to rebuild from the wreckage. Before we left that wretched house, there was one final thing I had to do. The police had taken the criminals, but they had left the tools of their torture behind. I walked over to the corner where the hidden projector sat, the machine that had cast my wife's image like a cheap carnival trick. It hummed with a low electric buzz, a mechanical parasite feeding on my daughter's grief. I didn't unplug it. I raised my heavy oak cane and brought it down with everything I had. The plastic shattered with a satisfying crunch. Lenses cracked. The hum died instantly. Then I went to the speakers hidden in the vents and ripped the wires out with my bare hands, ignoring the sting of the copper cutting into my skin. I wanted silence. I wanted the only sound in the room to be the truth. Emily watched me flinching at the violence of it, but then she walked over to the debris. She picked up a piece of the broken projector, a jagged shard of black plastic. She looked at it, then at me, and dropped it into the trash can. "It wasn't magic," she whispered, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "It was just plastic and lies." "That is all they ever were," I replied, taking her hand. "And plastic breaks." The flashing lights faded and the sirens died away, leaving my house in a silence that felt heavier than the storm outside. The legal aftermath was a long and exhausting road, but I walked every step of it with my head held high. Vanessa, true to her nature of self-preservation, testified against Jason in exchange for a plea deal. She received a reduced sentence of 5 years in a minimum security facility, a slap on the wrist perhaps, but her testimony ensured that the true architect of this nightmare was put away for a very long time. Jason was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. When the judge read the verdict, Jason finally looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only a profound emptiness. He realized too late that he had traded his family for a mirage of wealth that never existed. I didn't feel triumph as they led him away in chains. I felt the deep, aching sorrow of a father who had to amputate a limb to save the body. But I also felt relief. The cancer was gone. I didn't let Emily stay in that house of horrors a moment longer. I packed her things and brought her back to the home she grew up in, the home where the walls still held the warmth of happier memories. For the first few weeks, she was like a ghost, moving silently through the rooms, clutching a blanket and staring out the window. The doctors said she needed time to detox from the heavy sedatives Jason had been feeding her, but I knew the healing she needed went deeper than chemistry. She needed to find her roots again. I didn't offer her empty platitudes or tell her that everything happens for a reason, because some things happen simply because people are cruel. Instead, I offered her a pair of gardening gloves. One crisp morning, I walked into the living room and handed her the gloves and a trowel. I told her to come outside with me. We walked to the backyard, to the corner where Catherine's rose garden used to be the envy of the neighborhood. During my grief and the chaos with Jason, I had let it fall into ruin. The bushes were overgrown with thorns and weeds, choking the life out of the soil. It looked hopeless, much like how Emily felt inside. I got down on my knees in the dirt and started pulling at the weeds. I didn't say a word. I just worked. After a few minutes, Emily knelt beside me. She hesitated at first, but then she dug her hands into the earth. We spent days out there clearing the rot, pruning the dead branches, and preparing the soil for new life. We worked until our muscles ached, and our hands were stained dark with soil. It was in that silence, in the physical act of nurturing something real, that Emily began to come back to me. As we planted the first new bush, a vibrant red rose just like the ones her mother loved, I saw the first genuine smile cross her face in years. She looked at the small plant and then at me and whispered that we could make it beautiful again. She wasn't just talking about the garden. She was talking about us. 6 months have passed since that dark night, and the world looks very different now. The sun is shining and the air smells of blooming flowers. I am sitting on my front porch watching a car pull into the driveway. It is Emily, but she is not the fragile, broken woman she was. She steps out of the car wearing a sharp blazer, holding a stack of files with an air of authority that reminds me so much of myself 40 years ago. She has taken over the family foundation, and she is running it with a compassion and intelligence that makes me swell with pride. She is using our resources to help elderly victims of financial abuse, turning her own trauma into a shield for others. She waves at me, smiling that bright, radiant smile that lights up the whole block before heading inside to prepare for a board meeting. I watch her go, my heart full. I look down at the phone in my hand. On the screen is an old screenshot, a copy of the text message I sent to my lawyer that started the investigation, the digital footprint of the worst time in my life. For a long time, I kept it as a reminder to never let my guard down. But as I look at the vibrant garden and the strong woman my daughter has become, I realize I don't need the reminder anymore. The war is over. The good guys won. I press my thumb against the screen and hit delete. The image vanishes. A weight lifts off my shoulders that I didn't even realize I was still carrying. I lean back in my rocking chair and close my eyes, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. They say you should never wake the past, that you should let sleeping dogs lie. But I have learned that sometimes the past is not a monster to be feared. Sometimes the past is a guardian that wakes up just in time to protect the future. I look up at the blue sky and speak into the breeze. Catherine, I did it. I kept my promise. Our girl is safe and the house is clean. You can rest now. If you are listening to this and you feel that something is wrong in your own family, if you feel the cold shadow of manipulation creeping in, don't ignore it. Don't let polite silence be your downfall. Trust your gut. Fight for the ones you love, even if it means fighting the ones you share blood with. Because at the end of the day, family is not just about DNA. It is about who stands by you in the storm and who tries to leave you in the rain. Share this story if you believe that truth is worth fighting for. The biggest lesson I learned from this ordeal is that evil often wears a friendly face, and sometimes it shares your last name. We are taught that family is sacred, and that we should sacrifice everything for them. But there is a line where sacrifice becomes self-destruction. True loyalty is a two-way street. When someone shows you they are willing to hurt you for their own gain, believe them the first time. Protecting yourself and your peace is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of survival. Never let anyone, not even your own child, take away your dignity or your sanity. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear this message.